Hi, it's Mike Villar again. We're here on the second Villar for Prosecutor podcast. I'm here with Kevin Travis, who is the Watson Township Supervisor and a local attorney. Today we have a lot of interesting things to talk about, including an amicus brief, a friend of the court brief that Kevin drafted and sent into the Michigan Supreme Court. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about the precinct delegate convention. So, Kevin, you want to tell them what that was?
Yeah, so the precinct delegates, Republican precinct delegates of Allegan County, shall we say, felt left out of the process and decided that, you know what, there's enough of the old guard, those in power pulling the strings, making endorsements. And they said, you know what, we, the precinct delegates, should get together and see how we as precinct delegates feel about this. Who are we supporting as precinct delegates? And so there was a group of delegates that said, hey, you know what, we're going to pull together a meeting in pretty short notice. But all of the precinct delegates were invited.
Yep.
All of the candidates that Allegan County residents countywide are voting on were invited. That includes all the federal level jobs, the Senate, state rep, House rep, U.S. House rep, and the Supreme Court.
Yeah, we actually had several. Judge Boonstra.
Yes.
He was there, and Judge O'Grady, he's running for Supreme Court. Both of them are running for Supreme Court. We also had quite a big turnout for state rep, too.
Yes, we did. It was a good turnout. It was good to see so many people involved and excited about this election that's coming up, because everybody knows how important it is.
Yeah. There was over 100 people in attendance that night. Everyone, as far as I know, everyone was invited. Each precinct delegate was invited. All the people running for office were invited. Some chose not to show up. Some chose to present their position with a letter.
Mm-hmm.
But I am glad to announce that I was given the endorsement of the Republican precinct delegates. It is a primary endorsement, so they voted against. It was me versus Myron Cook, which is what's going to happen in the primary. The vote was quite lopsided, 70-2, and it was gratifying to me because in the past I've run for prosecutor, and the entire GOP establishment has been. You know, it's like a machine. They want their own precinct delegates. They want their own candidates to make it through the primaries. They say that they don't endorse for the primaries, but 4 of the 5 county commissioners endorse Myrene at this point, my opponent. And so they put their political sway and their political influence, they put it out for her. And I think the delegates felt like they wanted to say. Is that your feeling?
I think that's exactly what happened, and like I said, I think they felt maybe a little bit disenfranchised by those who are currently holding power, and I think eventually what they'd like to do is have that as more official.
Yeah, they want more say in what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well. That's the news. You know, I was given an endorsement by quite a lopsided measure, and I think that's indicative of grassroots support as opposed to top-down support. I'd like to take a few minutes before we get into your amicus brief, which is going to be quite interesting. I've been hearing a lot, and my opponent has been talking a lot about a prosecutor shortage across Michigan. And I think that she's saying that as a response to the fact that she's lost 19 prosecutors in the last 6 years. And we talked about that in the last podcast, where that's a significant number of prosecutors. I think she's trying to say that we don't have enough prosecutors, and that's why I'm losing all these prosecutors. And I just wanted to address that for a little bit. She started losing prosecutors 6 years ago when she became prosecuting attorney. So the majority of prosecutors that she has lost have not been in the last year when the prosecutor shortage has occurred. And, you know, you have an interesting story about that, because right now she's approved for 11 assistant prosecutors. She started with 8. She has 7 now. after losing 19 over the last 6 years. So it's becoming difficult for her to get people to accept a job in Allegan County. Why would you say?
Well, the answer is that I think Ms. Cook's reputation, Ms. Myrene's reputation, is that she is unethical, and that is, I think, part and parcel of why prosecutors are leaving, because they feel that their licenses are going to be on the line when they do unethical things, or if they're asked to be what they would construe to be unethical, and we'll definitely get to that in the amicus brief. But I found it fairly amusing this past week. So on my LinkedIn account, I get an in message, which also appeared in my personal email, from Human Resources of Allegan County, inquiring on whether or not I would be interested in applying for an assistant prosecutor job.
Holy cow. Now, have you ever been contacted by Human Resources of Allegan County?
Never.
Now, you've worked for Allegan County.
As a law clerk, yes.
And how long did you work for them?
Gosh, pretty close to 18 months.
And then how long has it been since you worked there?
Wow.
I'm throwing out tough questions right now.
Maybe 7 years plus.
So in the last 7 years, you've never been contacted?
Never.
So this week?
This week.
Okay.
Oddly enough, during an election year, and obviously I've supported you heavily throughout the years, I get this message from HR of Allegan County. I'm like, well, first of all, I thought somebody was catfishing me or something. I mean, it was so weird. But I'm like, I gotta call and figure out if this is real. Is this I literally thought it was a joke.
Yep.
And I called and I spoke to the person, and I said, look, Miss Myrene and I are not friends. We have gone back and forth with each other in the Michigan Supreme Court with regard to her unethical behavior, and that really she shouldn't be practicing law. And I think you're going to have a hard time filling this position.
You said this to the Allegan HR person?
Yes, I did. And I don't know, maybe they reached out to me because they're a fan of the Mike Villar podcast. Maybe we had pretty close to 10,000 viewers on our first one,
yeah.
Which I can tell you that I've had feedback from it from people that, hey, so and so watched this,
and what's the feedback been? Has it been pretty good?
I think so. I think it's people are paying attention to this. They really are. And
well, we've talked about some things that are really pretty serious.
Yes.
Sometimes we can laugh and joke about it, but the things that we talk about are very serious. So I take it you didn't agree to an interview?
No. I just left it as, hey, I think you're going to have a hard time filling this position, because it generally in the legal community, Allegan County is kind of looked at as a joke.
Yeah.
I practice mostly in Kent County, and Allegan in the legal communities is kind of the place you don't want to go practice because the judges are horrible.
Not all.
At least in the circuit court. At least historically in the circuit court, or dealing with the prosecutor's office has been just a chore.
Well, I've had attorneys tell me they won't come to Allegan for criminal cases.
Same. Yeah. Yep.
Well, that's pretty interesting, and I think that's why we're not afraid to step out and say something. Most attorneys do have some fear of that because they're afraid of the repercussions, and I'm probably just a little too dumb to be afraid of that. And, so another thing I wanted to talk about before, and I see my computer here just updated. I wanted to talk about the fact that quite often I've seen and heard from Myrene supporters, Ms. Cook supporters, that they're calling me a liar. They're calling me that I can't tell the truth, that I'm twisting things. And I think it's really interesting because when I talk about 19 prosecutors quitting, I have a list. I know each one. I can give, they don't want to be a part of this, obviously. They've gone on to other jobs and they don't want to be part of the drama. But they've never said, 19 haven't quit. But they call me a liar. And then when I say her budget's doubled, they're saying I'm twisting the facts. But it's like, I got the budget numbers from the Allegan County website. there's the budget numbers are the budget numbers. It was 1.2 million and 6 years ago, and now it's 2.1 million. So no, even though they say that I'm taking the truth and kind of twisting it, they've never given an example of anything that I've said that has not been correct.
Yeah, and the thing is that all of those budget numbers actually have to be reported to the state. So if you go to Michigan.gov, Treasury, local municipal finance, you'll find the budget numbers for Watson Township, for example. Yeah. And you'll certainly find the budget numbers for Allegan County there. So it's not like you're making stuff up. It is literally reported to the state by law.
Well, I think part of what they think is, well, there's a prosecutor shortage, and he's blaming his opponent for the prosecutor shortage. What they don't realize is the prosecutor shortage happened in the last year, and the exodus started 6 years ago.
Right.
So, and it's I think a part of it is mismanagement, and to give you an example of that, when my opponent has known, she announced in January, I think, that she was running again. So she has known that I've been running since January. She only got her website running about 2 weeks ago. So I don't know what it says about a person when they're running for an office and they don't have a website that's up. When her website did get up, she had an endorser page. And on that page, she had all the people that endorsed her 4 years ago. The videos, they had 16 videos, they were all from 4 years ago. And it had a list of people that was from 4 years ago. And I looked on that list, and I know there are people that no longer are on that list. So I contacted some of the people that she had listed as supporters. Found out that one of them was actually deceased. So she'd made a list and published that list without checking with the people that were on that list. And so for me, that's an example of carelessness and mismanagement. Why would you do that? I don't put up anything on my website that I can't verify. And so there are people, when the second list, she had to take down her endorser page. And it came up another day and a half later without the people that I had contacted and who apparently had called her to say, hey, why is my name on there?
Yeah, and certainly we can get into this when we talk about the amicus more, but it's disturbing how many attorneys or people that have law licenses, I don't know if they necessarily know if they practice or not, but they certainly have a bar card that are endorsing her. And, the legal profession is a self-managed, self-regulated profession. Yeah. If we see misconduct, we are, by the rules, supposed to report.
We're ethically obligated to report it.
Yes.
We can't not report it.
Exactly. And, the number of people that are hitching their wagon to Miss Myrene, it's really mind-boggling if they actually knew what's going on. And I think a lot of them actually do know what's going on because I've told them. Yeah. And the fact that they're still supporting this person really tells me that maybe they don't care about ethics. I don't know. I mean, that's just my assumption.
Yeah.
That's just my assumption. But because what I've seen, like I said, she really should not be practicing law.
Well, let's go back then to right before you wrote your amicus brief. Now, explain to everybody what an amicus brief is.
So an amicus brief, it literally means friend of court. Okay, so a township has the ability to write an amicus brief to the Michigan Supreme Court or the Court of Appeals as of right. We don't have to ask for permission because they figure, well, you're a fellow unit of government, and you therefore must have some sort of interest enough to warrant as of right to write an amicus brief.
And that's true for any case that is in front of the Supreme Court.
Yes, it doesn't matter if it's civil or criminal or anything like that.
Now, has Watson Township ever filed an amicus brief before this?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. All right.
No.
Well, so now that's what an amicus brief is, and you wrote one to the Supreme Court in the case of People versus Daniel Lowe. And so I'd like to just do a brief introduction, then I'm going to let you talk about what you did.
Yeah.
When I ran 4 years ago, it was kind of an open secret that Judge Margaret Baker, and Myron Cook were communicating with one another. And so I filed a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request. And I asked for those communications, and what I found is that in the Daniel People versus Daniel Lowe case, Judge Baker and my opponent were actually emailing one another about the Daniel Lowe case during the Daniel Lowe case. In fact, at one point, the trial was going on in front of Judge Baker, and she was emailing my opponent. And the ethics rules say that you can't do ex parte communications with the judge. So that means one side can't talk to the judge without the other side knowing. So here, last election, my opponent said, well, it was administrative in nature, so it wasn't substantive about the case. But what she failed to tell everybody is that even if it's administrative, you have an absolute obligation after the communication is done to then tell the other side. And so what they did is they talked to one another, whether it's administrative or substantive about the case. They had an obligation to tell the other side, which they never did. And the reason they didn't do that is because whenever a judge is talking to the prosecutor about the case that they're in, and if the defense attorney finds out, they'd lose their mind and file for mistrial. So that's what was happening. And lo and behold, I found these emails, and I sent them to Mr. Lowe's appellate attorney. And then the case came in front of Judge Villar on a motion for a new trial based on this evidence. So you can pick it up from there.
Yeah, and even going back further, it's always been kind of the running joke that Judge Baker was going off to coach Miss Myrene.
And how did you know that?
Well, so Judge Cronin, when I clerked for him, he seemed to be the only judge that was actually running trials when I was clerking there, and very rarely did Judge Baker actually run a trial. And we actually ran quite a few trials, criminal trials, in Judge Cronin's court. And Judge Baker, she had a TV monitor in her chambers, so she could basically spy on Judge Cronin in her chambers and watch what was going on in a trial. And curiously enough, like as soon as we had a pause in the case, and Judge and I would go back in the chambers, then all of a sudden Marge Baker would run upstairs, and Judge Cronin would say, "Oh, there she goes to go coach Myrene." And we didn't really have proof of that, but certainly that's what it looked like, and certainly they had lunch enough together, as evidenced by the emails finally. But certainly there was enough of a suspicion that where there's smoke, there might be fire. And you proved that certainly there was indeed a lot of fire.
And it wasn't just the Daniel Lowe case. There were several other cases where they had ex parte communications, which were inappropriate. And so go ahead.
So you did a FOIA request. You found a bunch of emails. I did a FOIA request as well.
Well, let's back up, because when Mr. Lowe's appellate attorney filed a motion for a new trial, Judge Villar granted that and gave him a new trial.
Yes. Yep.
And then the prosecutor's office appealed that.
Yes.
Went to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals said it was administrative in nature. And there was a dissent in the Court of Appeals that was a scathing dissent.
Yeah, so here's the thing that really riles me up. So that Court of Appeals decision, it was a published decision. So that means it has the effect and power of law. The Court of Appeals, so we as attorneys that have an ethical obligation to report misbehavior, that's what happened. Misbehavior got reported. Appropriate action was, well, I shouldn't even say appropriate action was taken. The appellate attorney took action, and that's really the only action that's ever happened in this case. But the Court of Appeals said, "Oh, there's nothing wrong here. There's no unethical behavior," and basically threw out the whole rule of ex parte communication. Basically, like green lighted it. So if a judge and a prosecutor want to go and rig a trial, so long as they make an argument, I think how did Judge Villar put it? Mental gymnastics.
Yep.
mental gymnastics to arrive to their decision. Brilliant wording.
And you know what's funny is that even though the Court of Appeals said that gave it an approval, an open approval of talking to a judge like that, a fourth grader knows. It's not. I'm amazed that our Court of Appeals could even think that it was okay, because even if you asked a fourth grader, okay, should a judge talk to one side or the other during a trial, and they would say no. It's obvious. And so fortunately, our Supreme Court said, no, we're going to look at the issue of whether Judge Baker's misconduct entitles Daniel Lowe to a new trial. And I listened to the oral arguments on October 5th of last year, and even the prosecuting attorney's attorney in the Supreme Court acknowledged that what she did was wrong. So you had the Myron Cook's attorney acknowledging that it was wrong. Several of the Supreme Court justices say, of course it was wrong. If she had the opportunity to not do it again, she wouldn't, and I'm not sure that I agree with that. But it's so obviously wrong that the issue was, does it entitle Mr. Lowe to a new trial or not? So that's the issue the Supreme Court's looking at, and they still haven't issued an opinion. But going back, before it got to the oral argument, you have the right to do an amicus brief.
Yes, so like I said, the whole ex parte thing was brought up during your campaign last time, and I thought, oh, for sure, the Court of Appeals is going to do the right thing and uphold Judge Villar and allow this man to have a trial. And quite frankly, if he's guilty, he should go to prison.
Right.
Okay, but
Yep.
the fundamental thing,
It has to be a fair trial.
it has to be a fair trial under the U.S. Constitution and the state Constitution, and that's what we as attorneys we swear that we're going to uphold. Me as an elected public official, that's what I swore to uphold as
Even
well.
as attorneys, we swear to uphold our
Yes.
Constitution.
Yes, so when I put my name in the little book across the street, that was part of my oath, was to uphold the Constitution. His innocence or guilt, it's with regard to him having a fair trial is not what's currently relevant. If he has a fair trial and he's found guilty, he should go to prison. Absolutely.
Right.
So I want to make that clear, because I think the public, when they say, well, why would you try to defend someone that was convicted of a sex crime? Like, well, it's not. I'm defending the system. I'm defending the system
The
of justice.
Constitution. I tell people, they say, how can you defend somebody who you think is guilty or you maybe know is guilty? And I say, we are defenders of the Constitution. We want to make sure, because in the United States, there's a presumption of innocence, and there's a burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt placed on the prosecutor. Now, if I get to be prosecutor, that's my job, is to prove things beyond a reasonable doubt. But why do we have those presumptions? It's because we would prefer that guilty people go free over innocent people being imprisoned. And so what we do is we defend the Constitution to make sure that the prosecutor and the police prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that protects everyone. That protects every one of us, because once you get rid of those protections, then the police cannot arrest you for anything. And so I tell people it's a constitutional function to defend people, even when you know they're guilty. Now, you can never let them lie. You can't let them lie under oath. But you can defend them and make sure that the prosecutors prove beyond a reasonable doubt their case.
Yes, that's exactly right. Basically, sometimes as a defense attorney, you're left with the position of you make the people prove their case under the Constitution.
Yep.
And if they do so, good on them.
Yep.
So really, when that Court of Appeals case came down, basically changing the ethics law.
Yeah.
I was, to put it bluntly, I was pissed, and I looked up, about writing an amicus, because I was just gonna, just try to write one and publish it on my own. I was so incensed by that, and I saw, well, a township, a local unit of government, can do an amicus as of right. So I put it to my township board, and my township board knows what's going on. My township supported you quite heavily. I told my township what was going on, and I asked permission from my township board if I could write an amicus, and why, and to defend the Constitution. And it was unanimous. Absolutely, yes. write that amicus, Kevin. And so I did.
So what kind of things did you put in the amicus? Now, by the way, we can in the comments when we post this podcast, we can put your amicus brief in the comments if you'd like.
Oh, absolutely. I every attorney I come across, if we get to talking about ethics or anything like this, I will bring this up, and I will say every attorney in the state of Michigan needs to know about this case, and I hope this podcast is being watched by people up on high. I hope it gets that much traction, because this is unacceptable.
Yeah.
I mean, we had oral arguments back in October. We still don't have a decision. I mean, I hope they're not holding off on an opinion to be able to sway some sort of election. I wouldn't put it past anybody in today's day and age. But I digress.
What did you say in your amicus? That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah. So really, it came down to Judge Riordan's dissent. He was the lone dissenter. It was a 2-1 opinion, and he started off like, the fundamental part of the Constitution is to have a fair trial and a fair tribunal, and he went off and discussed a case that said, hey, if there are a Supreme Court case, I can't not think of the name of it, but it's the one I heavily cited twice in both of the amicuses that I wrote. But the three prongs, one of them is would it cause impropriety in other cases?
Yeah. An appearance of impropriety.
An appearance of impropriety, or lead to the erosion of the public's opinion of the judiciary and the legal system. Well, on that first prong, regarding other cases, well, that's where I educated the court, because otherwise the court only looks at the record before them, the record of the low case.
Yeah.
So they don't know anything about other cases that ex parte communication was going on. And I did my own FOIA after you did yours, and because you had yours for a specific date range, and I had mine for basically ever since Marge Baker took the bench, and going forward up to the date of yours. And I found additional emails. One was the case of People versus Brimhall. It was during a 2-day jury trial. On day one of that trial, Judge Baker emails Miss Cook and says, hey, your assistant prosecutor's doing an okay job, but she has some fact problems. Well, that sure as hell doesn't sound administrative to me.
Right.
I mean, you're literally talking about the quality of a prosecutor that used to be at the prosecutor's office, Judge Baker.
Yeah,
but
even in low, she asked my opponent, well, why didn't this victim have a medical evaluation?
Yeah.
And she was answered why, and those were facts outside of the facts that came in at trial.
Yeah, completely not administrative.
So back to Brimhall.
And I put that in a footnote and said, and I would implore anybody to read my footnote. I said, this should be the subject of a Judicial Tenure Commission complaint, an attorney grievance complaint, but I don't think in my footnote, and I wrote this to the Supreme Court, and I meant it. I don't think those regulatory bodies are going to do anything about it,
right?
Because I was that pissed at that point,
yeah,
that the Court of Appeals pretty much said we don't care about ethics, and it makes me question, why did I even become an attorney, and an obligation to justice. It really just upset me that bad.
Yeah.
That I wanted to make sure that the Supreme Court knew that this was an absolute awful, disgusting decision to be able to just ignore constitutional protections.
And I think you addressed how other actions in Allegan County have happened.
Yes. I think I made us this is not an exercise in reductio ad absurdum. This is actually what happened within the span of about 6 years. Multiple cases where, unfortunately, both judges at the time on the circuit court bench were exercising an ex parte communication, talking about the quality of their former employees. and how they're doing their job.
Yep.
It's like, no. I also wrote, hey, I was trained as a secondary education teacher, history and social sciences. And, I think every middle school, high school kid would know that there are 3 different branches of government.
And they're separate.
And they are separate. Yes. And that they would know that the prosecutor is probably part of the executive branch and that the judiciary is part of the judicial by name, implication. And that they are separate and they're supposed to be independent branches of government. And
my concern has always been is that when you're doing a trial, you are against the prosecutor, but it makes it even more difficult when the judge and the prosecutor are basically on the same team.
Yeah, exactly. It's like I said, the opinion of Allegan County and the legal community is not very high, and I think it has that reputation. People are just like, oh yeah, well, Judge Baker's just playing ball for the prosecutor.
Did after you wrote your brief, did anybody file any kind of response to it?
So, Myrene Cook's office, and I don't know, it was very poorly written, so I'd assume it was probably Myrene herself, wrote a motion to quash the amicus of my township.
So for people that are listening, what does that mean to file a motion to quash?
A motion to quash means squash it like a bug.
Yeah.
Like, oh, your motion, I'm gonna stamp you out like a little insect. I'm gonna put you on my boot heel and squish you like a bug.
And your brief would be eradicated from the record, so nobody could read it.
That's correct. Yes, and I can tell you, I've talked to plenty of appellate attorneys about this case. Like I said, I talk to any attorney that's willing to listen. I tell them about this case, and the ones that do a lot of appellate work, they're like, "You mean somebody tried to quash your amicus?" I'm like, "Yeah, somebody tried to quash our amicus." That was supported by a unanimous vote of my township board by resolution. I actually made a copy of the resolution and submitted it with my amicus to say, yep, this is the authority that I'm operating under from my township board. And as an attorney, to uphold the law of the state. And so Myrene, she said it was a blatant political ploy, basically, just some, political thing that, I'm just trying to score political points against her. No. My response to her, and I was so ticked off. I sat down and I punched that thing out, the response to that thing. I said, I'm writing this amicus to save the judiciary from itself. Because the Court of Appeals made such a horrendous decision that really puts the legitimacy of our entire profession at risk, that they need to step back, take a step, because they screwed up so bad that they had to be called. They essentially slapped him in the face, Mike.
Well, I read it, and I was pleased that you did it. I think that that at this point, Judge Baker and my opponent haven't been held to account for their bad behavior. I'm hoping that the Supreme Court will do it. I'm fearful that they won't. That's what I'm fearful that they won't, because I think that the Court of Appeals has given prosecutors and judges the green light to talk about cases while the cases are going on, and I don't think that's a good place to end with the law.
And that's why I say go look at that footnote in Brimhall.
Yep.
Because I did a Babe Ruth, boy.
Yep.
Called my shot.
Yeah. Well, listen, thank you for being here today. This has been very enlightening. I hope that the people that listen to it find it enlightening as well. I will post your amicus brief and your response, if you'd like, under the comments of this podcast, and hopefully we can do this again soon.
Yeah, and I'm praying that there's going to be a decision on this case, and hopefully out there in podcast land, somebody that is not afraid to make the right decision sees this and is fired up and passionate as
and will
as
make the right decision.
And we'll make the right decision, and hopefully we can restore justice in this state. I mean, it's crazy to think that little old Allegan County has kind of become the epicenter of a decision that affects
very important decision.
all of us.
Yeah.
All of us.
Well, again, Kevin, thank you. Hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, guys. And this is our second podcast, so hope to see you again soon.